4, 3, 2. Order, order. Angus MacDonald to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Dr. HoC. It is an honour to serve under your chairmanship. And I beg the House to move, that the House has considered community benefits from renewable energy. In all of our careers, we've seen extraordinary changes, the advent of the internet, artificial intelligence, mobile phones, and going back 50 years, the early stages of many of our lives, we had the North Sea oil boom. And that North Sea oil boom was extraordinary for many countries, not least Norway, who saved 1.7 trillion US dollars since from the oil boom. Great Britain saved none of that money. And I'm very worried that we will save none of the money from this extraordinary renewables boom that is coming our way. One of the biggest systemic changes in our life is happening right now, the move from fossil fuels to renewables, and many billions of pounds are being made. A huge number of jobs are being created, and cheap electricity is being generated. However, it is overseas companies and overseas ownership of the renewable projects, which we are seeing happening all over the UK. Precious little of that money is ending up in the hands of the impacted people. Now, the issue I have is that these renewable projects, whether they're solar, wind, pump storage, etc., are in rural areas, and the locals suffer the visual impact. You will all have seen miles and miles of 200-metre high wind turbines, and field after field, sometimes of prime land, covered in solar panels. Villages, people, face these industrial projects. We really need to take people with us on this net zero journey. Help yourself.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and congratulating him on securing this really important debate. I represent roughly 1,500 farmers in Westland. All of them pretty much have water flowing through their fields and their land, often very, very quickly indeed. And so very few of them take advantage of hydroelectricity, which potentially could be a source of cross-subsidisation of farming, but also creating important renewable energy for our communities as a whole. Does he think that hydro technology, particularly on farmland, is a great way forward? We can farm and produce renewable energy at the same time.
Thank you very much. I think micro renewables is the way ahead. And the more micro, the better, basically. And whether it's a solar thing on your roof or hydro for your farm, I couldn't support it more. So in 2023, research by Octopus Energy in a written submission to Parliament showed that 87% of people would support a turbine in their community if it decreased their bills. Now, I don't blame the landowner. These projects can allow farmers to retain the land in their family for generations to come. In some way, it's like discovering oil or gold on your land. It is great that our bountiful wind and rain can be such an asset for us, especially when in an era where coal is unacceptable. Nuclear is being phased out. Gas is often imported from countries with unacceptable moral standing. It's badly hitting our balance of payments, and environmentally, it is unfriendly to transport it to Britain. Renewables are absolutely the future. Now, the 68 million people in the UK are enormous beneficiaries of our renewable sectors, but the cost is borne by a fraction of this number, those living in the remotest areas. We represent the population who pay a 50% premium to the electricity connection fee to those living in cities. They're not connected to mains gas and therefore pay a great deal to have tankers deliver heating oil to their houses.
Would you give way?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
I'm most grateful to the Honourable Member for Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire for giving way and congratulate him on securing this debate. I'm sure he will know that we're talking about fairness to communities, and one of the unfair issues with communities and costs of electricity, of course, is related to standing charges, whereby households in North Wales and Merseyside pay £100 more a year than London. Would he agree with me, therefore, that the present arrangement of standing charges is fundamentally unfair and it should be shared more fairly across nations of the United Kingdom?
I absolutely love that. I'm going to make you a dame in my first honours list. I think it is an absolute disgrace that people in rural Britain are paying a premium to get renewables, even though it's us who are generating the electricity. And so this standing charge should be the subject of our next discussion. Thank you very much. Those of us in the Highlands, and indeed in many other parts of Britain, have long, dark, windy and cold winters, with many people opening the curtains in the morning to look out onto a wind farm sending cheap green energy to the big cities. The remote Highlands and Islands, the Scottish borders, Wales, Cumbria, and the West Country are our poorest areas. They suffer from the highest... Yep, thank you.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that community benefit and compensation for communities is just as important as for the communities that experience these projects as it is for the planning system? Take it from a former planning inspector to smooth the path of planning permission. If we had a sensible and predictable level of community benefit, that would make the granting of planning permission smoother with fewer objections.
Thank you. There is a recent change to planning in Scotland, and I'm not sure if that equates to England, called NPR4, which does make the importance of an economic benefit to the community part of the criteria for getting your planning. So we are moving towards that. So these areas I mentioned are amongst our poorest areas. They suffer from the highest level of fuel poverty, an older population, lack of affordable housing, poor transport infrastructure, struggling market towns, lower wages, and often worse education and health services in the cities. Rural people have higher costs and lower incomes.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I would be more than honoured.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for my honourable friend for giving way. In Caerfyrddin, we have a possible of 4 lines coming through my constituency of new electricity cables and pylons. Does the honourable member agree that the best community benefit for Caerfyrddin and our rural communities would be to underground these cables rather than have these pylon lines coming through? Diolch.
Somebody whose opinion I respect greatly told me that the work had been done to underground this and it was not any more expensive. I was very surprised at that because I'd understood from the transmission line companies in Scotland that it was a great deal more expensive to underground them. But that is something I will very definitely look into because I do know that in Norway it is a requirement to underground them. So I think it's something which we should explore further. So we have boom time in renewables, generating trillions of pounds over many decades. And we have a rural population that really, really needs financial help and investment. Yes, thank you.
Yes, in the last decade, my constituency has seen a wide range of solar schemes with different community benefits, ranging from £20,000 a year for the 25 years expected life of the project, to which is handed over automatically to parish council, to just a £30,000 pot, which people have to bid into. Would my honourable friend agree that there should be equity of treatment? And do you agree that there are benefits to having an ongoing relationship beyond the monetary value that brings?
Yeah, very good.
I think the Honourable Lady will be thrilled with the next part of my speech, which will answer this. So the answer is we have a huge financial need, and we have the renewable revenue, which we're going to talk about in a second. So money and need, bingo, we have a match. Isn't this exactly what we're here in Parliament to facilitate? The Great British Energy Bill Committee is largely here. I'm just pleased to hear now. But that committee holds the prosperity of much of rural Britain in its hands. You can insist on communities having a stake in local renewable projects, and you can insist that we legislate to require all renewable projects to pay a significant sum to impacted areas. Amazingly, the GB Energy Bill had no mention of community ownership of renewable projects or of community benefits.
Could the Honourable Gentleman give way?
Yes, thank you.
I thank you for giving way. I've been fortunate to visit your beautiful constituency, and in my beautiful constituency of Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, we have Rampion 2, which is a renewable wind farm which is due to come onto the sea closer to land than Rampion 1, with huge environmental and visible impacts. But to your point about where the benefits sit, there's no current requirement for any visitor centre to sit within the constituency that is impacted by this wind farm. So would you agree with me that any commercial benefits, such as a visitor centre which will bring tourism and jobs, should reside in the constituency which is most impacted?
Well, just for the benefit of everyone in the room, just the word you we do avoid, because that refers to me, so we do it third person. Just a reminder for all. Angus, MacDonald.
It's fair to say, in my list of key things to do with the money, building a visitor centre wasn't one of them, but I shall add it to my list about number 97. There's space there. But I think we'll talk about it in a minute more, but fuel poverty, affordable housing, etc., I think is probably the key use for that money at the beginning anyway. Anyway, the Lib Dem energy spokesman, Pippa Haling, has submitted a clause which will allow us to have community benefit considered in the bill, and I very much hope that that amendment is taken forward. I had a motion passed in the Highland Council on community benefits. I've consulted with the electricity generators and Ofgem. I've met with government ministers here and in Scotland, discussed with most knowledgeable people in all political parties, and generally bored everyone I can find on this issue. I can say that there is a consensus that it would be fair that the impacted rural people of the Highlands and Islands, Scotland and the UK as a whole must benefit from bearing the cost of hosting our energy infrastructure. Now, the Highland Council have done the work, the social value charter, and they would be very pleased to share it. They and I agree of almost all aspects, except I think that the amount paid to communities should be as a percentage of gross income from the projects, rather than £12,500 per megawatt. A percentage would allow communities to benefit from a soaring electricity price, as happened after Russia invaded Ukraine, and it would protect the project owners, the utilities, if the electricity price slumped. So here is my financial proposal, that 5% of revenue from all newly consented renewable energy generated from both onshore and offshore should be paid to community energy funds. For onshore projects, 2/3 of that should be paid to the affected council board, with 1/3 paid to a council strategic fund. For offshore projects, all of that 5% of gross revenue should go to a council strategic fund. An existing renewable project should also pay money, and I'll explain that in a second. Yes, thank you.
The Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I'm sure that he will agree that the ownership of energy production is really important. The last government's inaction left the country reliant on energy produced abroad and owned abroad. So I'm very proud of the work that this government has done to found the publicly owned GB Energy, which will give us long-term energy security. And I really welcome this particular debate on the community benefits of renewable energy projects. I was reassured in the House just last week that communities like mine, the constituency in Cullingworth, where we are looking at, there are proposals to host associated infrastructure, so basically battery storage. And I would really like to ask whether he agrees with me that these sorts of benefits should not just be to energy generation, but the associated infrastructure like battery storage, that those community benefits should also come locally from those projects. Thank you.
I wholeheartedly agree, and it should be the same for the transmission lines and the interceptors and for pump storage and battery, really the whole infrastructure of producing renewables. So I completely agree with that. So where's that 5% going to come from? It is really important that investors do not suffer from swings in British policy and that they continue to invest in UK energy infrastructure. I believe it is key that this increase should be passed on to all consumers in the UK as part of a green tariff. My informed opinion is that 5% to the impacted communities would translate to about 1.25% increase in electricity prices in Britain. What should the council ward that is receiving these substantial amounts of money use it for? And here are 3 examples of what is being doing already. There is one community fund near me which gives £1,000 to each of the properties in the community. If you gave £1,000 to 1,000 properties, that is £1 million. Perhaps the locals managing the fund would allocate it to households that earn less than the UK median household income of £34,500. In any case, at a time of winter fuel allowance cuts, this would be most welcome. The second one is the communities should use the money to build affordable housing. And I know a third community that injects money into its local care sector, of our care home. To plagiarise from the Highland Council report, and for context, in 2023, in the Highlands, local communities received approximately £9 million. This is below the expected commitment based on Crown Estate Scotland's guidelines, which suggested developers should contribute £5,000 per megawatt, equating to £13.9 million. The total income from wind generation in the Highlands for 2023 was estimated to be around £590 million. This calculation is based on a potential production of 11.8 gigawatts. If all renewables are included, including hydro, offshore wind, pump storage, the benefit increased to 5%, and the amount of renewable energy doubled by 2030 to 22 gigawatts, which is likely, then the community benefit would rise well above £50 million per year. That is a heck of a lot of money to Highland rural communities. What would this be across the UK? £500 million a year? £1 billion? £5 billion over 10 years? This is proper levelling up funds for rural communities. On the island of Harris, just give me, can I have 1 more minute? On the island of Lewis in the Hebrides, it has recently been announced that 2 council wards will share £4.5 million for a single offshore wind farm. This shows what can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the honourable member agree that when we're looking at scaling up wind, so floating offshore wind, for example, that will benefit Scotland and where I'm from in Cornwall, that we could look more closely at those contracts for difference and the licences and leases with the Crown Estate to really embed social value in those contracts on a big scale, so that some of those benefits, be it for apprenticeships or local benefits to build up the supply chain, could actually be accounted for, and that there are exemptions to the WTO rules and things like that, and we could actually manage to do that in quite a substantial way.
As a Highland councillor for quite a few years and on the planning committee, we heard application after application promising a large number of jobs and a large number of local buying, and we didn't see that. But I do think we need to tighten up a great deal on what is actually being offered in all the different aspects of renewables. I'm nearly finished. I've been looking at the situation overseas. In Denmark, new renewable projects must offer at least 20% ownership of the overall venture to local residents. In Germany, there's a local tax on renewables. In Helgoland, an archipelago in the North Sea, 3 offshore wind farms were built in the mid-2010s, and the tax revenues taken in by the municipality was €22 million in 2016 alone. And in Ireland, the contribution to Community Benefit Fund is to be set at €2 per megawatt hour of generation.
Will he give way?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
I'd like to thank him for raising this terribly important debate and the fact that rural communities are not being sufficiently paid to host the infrastructure that we need to get to net zero. Earlier this month, I visited Awalam and Tower, a community energy charity based in my constituency, where they are using the revenue that they have, that they're getting from a turbine that they erected themselves to pay for the regeneration in this deprived area of Wales. Does he think that that is a preferable or desired outcome in comparison to sort of other projects such as Butte Energy's project in Powys, whereby the developer is hiding the community energy funds away behind layers of bureaucracy that might make it inaccessible to local residents?
I think the absolutely sweet spot of this entire discussion would be community ownership of their own renewables, which they could control and distribute as they wanted. And indeed, that is happening in some places. Of course, access to funding is the big issue, but it is a perfect solution. So surely one of our great injustices is that our poorer people, who provide half the energy to the UK, have the highest level of fuel poverty, the highest electricity bills, and suffer the industrialisation of their nearby countryside. Now is the time to resolve this injustice. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered community benefits from renewable energy projects. If you wish to do a speech, can you stand and then we can calculate, because we're going to take the front benchers at 3:28, so there's really not a lot of time left because we had a lot of long interventions. So we will do the math, and in the meantime we'll start with, what have we got on this side? Start on the government side, Torquil Crichton.
Doctor, it's a pleasure to serve under you, and I commend the Honourable Member for Inverness, Skye and Western Ross-shire for raising this important debate. Attendance here shows just how important this element of GB energy and the transformation we're going through will be to many, many constituencies. I've rushed here, via lunch of course, from the GB Bill Committee, which will establish GB energy. It will be the GB Energy Act will be the first act to pass into law from this Parliament, Labour delivering change within weeks of coming to office. And GB Energy and that Act and this transformation will change not only the way we produce power and the impact we have on a burning planet, but also the way we live our lives. And it could have a transformative effect on communities such as mine. And I commend the Under-Secretary of State, Honourable Member for Rutherglen, for the way he sees the agenda on GB Energy and seen the potential for transition that this could have on places like Nahill and Near, on the island of Egg, in my honourable friend's constituency, which he visited recently. And moving to renewables, as we move to renewables, we shouldn't forget that we're transitioning away from carbon, and we have to balance that transition with maintaining jobs in the North Sea, which are a vital element for many economies and many communities and many families in Nahill and Near. But the focus of today's debate is on one element of that transition, on community benefit, which I would rather describe and define as community share. Because when people hear benefit, they think they're getting crumbs. When they have a share, they own it and control it. And as it happens, my community has become the epicentre for community-owned wind farms in the UK. Community-owned turbines stretch from Barra in the south to Galson in the north of Lewis. And these community-owned assets bring in millions of pounds each year to communities which own them. Something like 23.5 megawatts is produced each year, a modest amount, but that brings in £3 million a year to small rural communities. And Scotland's community-owned wind farms provide, on average, 34 times more benefit of payments to local communities than the equivalent privately owned wind farms. You do the maths, you see the potential that community-owned energy schemes could have to transform the whole of the UK. What's not to like about them? And these community-owned schemes, which support, in my community, anything from war home grants to native tree planting, are a template for what could happen in constituencies across the whole of the UK. And these community-owned schemes need, for renewal and expansion, they need funding, yes, but primarily they need access to the grid. And for us in the Western Isles, that means getting space, reserved space by regulation or legislation, on a planned interconnector, 1.8 gigawatt sub-sea cable, which will connect us to the mainland and will enable turbines swinging the Atlantic to turn on light bulbs in Birmingham and in the city and many other places.
It's 2.5, but because you did not know, then we can't hold you to that.
There's been an apparent...
Okay.
Could I continue?
If the honourable member's concluding, it would be ideal, because there's still 15 people.
There's been an apparent breakthrough in that 3 community-owned estates have come together with a plan for a 43-megawatt wind farm and have been given a connection on the grid. And that grid connection is crucial. But so also is the massive funding gap these communities face between getting from concept through environmental regulation, planning and connection. That's where GB Energy, I think, has a role. I've advocated before for a community energy unit within GB Energy to help communities tackle this minefield of complexities of finance and regulation. Now, a minister can't snap his finger and bring GB Energy or a community unit into being, but I think if officials from GB Energy were to shadow and assist these 3 states in their efforts over the next 2 years, we would learn an enormous amount about community energy and create a template that other communities across the UK could follow. Thank you.
I remind people to Bob, because we're still working out who's speaking, who's intervening. Okay, in that case, with a 2.5 time limit from now on, we will go to Sarah Dyke.
It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair today, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire, for securing this important debate. Now, I commend the new government's aspiration to increase our rural energy infrastructure. The previous Conservative government's failure to invest in renewable energy and to insulate our homes led directly to the energy crisis, pushing up energy bills for everyone and squeezing personal finances. In Somerset, we are investing and expanding our renewable energy infrastructure, and under the net zero pathway, the equivalent of 45% of Somerset's future expected electricity demand will be met by local renewable energy generation by 2050. But Dr. HoC, I believe that when communities host renewable energy infrastructure such as solar farms, they should benefit from it. When I recently asked the Secretary of State about this, he agreed. The Secretary of State was clear that when communities take on the responsibility of hosting clean energy infrastructure, they should benefit from it. Yet, when I wrote to the Minister for Energy regarding this, the response I received stated blankly that the government has no formal role in ensuring community benefits in solar. Now, this is not the case with onshore and wind power, which the government is taking action to ensure is covered. This leaves communities in Somerset who host solar infrastructure totally reliant on developers to offer tangible benefits, because developments are also ineligible for community infrastructure levy obligations in the way that new housing is. Dr. HoC, the lack of obligations on developers means that communities are unlikely to benefit from housing and hosting installations, leading to ongoing tensions within communities. This also begs further questions with the government's development of Great British Energy that I hope the Minister might respond to today. Because if British Energy is going to invest in new ground-mounted solar farms, would they and could they ensure that local communities benefit from hosting this infrastructure, as the government have claimed is their aim? So I look forward to hearing the Minister's comments today, and I hope that we can continue to move forward and increase clean, green energy production. Thank you.
Ben Goldsborough.
Thank you very much, Dr. HoC. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Obviously, in my constituency of South Norfolk, I have quite a bit of energy infrastructure going on, be it the proposed Norwich to Tilbury line, the East Pye solar farm that has just been announced, or the Orsted battery energy storage site to the north of my constituency. To say that this is something that is not a hypothetical for my residents is very much a reality. is something that would be underselling the matter. Now, for me, we've talked about community benefit and community wealth building. Well, that is not something that my constituents are happy to hear. They want to hear the words compensation. They don't want to hear the words hosting, because at the end of the day, a pylon is not being hosted, it is being placed in their back garden. I think what's really important for us to remember within this debate is we live in a wasteland of any regulatory framework over compensation. This is something that individual businesses that take on these projects to grow their own enterprises, and don't get me wrong, they are a private enterprise, they're there to make profit, but at the same time they need to work within a regulatory framework to make sure they're held to account and made sure to pay for the local people who are having to face that development in their area. So what we've seen locally is when we talk about the National Grid, for example, they provide their own funding and their own grant-based system. But what they do not do is they do not grant funds to individuals. It is only to the general. They take into account things like social benefit and economic benefit and environmental benefit. But this is judged by their own criteria. This is not something they are held to account for. It is not something that ensures that local people have a say over what is coming back to them. The situation gets even dire when we talk about solar farms. When we talk about the issue, obviously it's just the industry body that is responsible for setting out different guidance to what should be happen to all member bodies within it. Again, this sets up an issue where we get our residents in the areas considering having this infrastructure on their back garden, where they do feel not heard, they do not feel that they are being listened to in terms of what they want and where they need it. And what this ends in is a situation where we want to drive towards net zero, we need to drive forward with our industrial upgrade of our national grid, but what we are doing is we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in terms of putting people off in our future development of being a green superpower for the rest of the world to follow. Thank you.
Cooper. Thank you, Madam Chairman. A pleasure to serve under you, and congratulations on bringing this vital debate. Wha but lo the bonny hills, the very first line of the song Bonnie Galloway, I'll spare you by not singing it, extols the virtues of the rolling uplands of the southwest of Scotland. Yet the tranquillity of the moors, farms and forests has been disturbed these last few years by the relentless march of wind turbines. And now Dumfries and Galloway is festooned with them, and we have many, many more on the way as we are in the foothills of a renewables revolution. Arguments for or against wind farms are not for here today. I feel that battle has been lost, though we must fight a rearguard action against ever bigger turbines. Giants of over 650 feet from base to rotor tip are the fashion, and they're moving ever closer to our towns and villages. I feel that we will see governments happily trample local opposition to wind farms, and I feel they will also turn a deaf ear to forcing power cables underground. Whether we welcome wind farms or have them foisted upon us, we must wrest what we can from them by way of community benefit. Communities already see little enough of the supply chain benefits. It's to be hoped that the previous UK government's efforts to create free ports in Scotland might see more of the manufacturing based here in Britain. I have hopes too that Labour will make good on a Northern Ireland enhanced investment zone. As mapped out by the previous Conservative government, it included the western end of my constituency, Dumfries and Galloway. It would be a game changer. Imagine the jobs created if we could build these giant turbines in Stranraer and ship them out via the deep water port of Cairnryan. On renewables, we in rural Scotland have had much of the pain and little of the gain. Certainly will.
Thank you for giving way. And will you agree with me that the difference in Dumfries and Galloway and many parts of the Highlands and Islands that have benefited from community-owned wind farms or commercially owned wind farms is community ownership of land? And were that pattern to be repeated in his part of the world, then communities would benefit not only from community land ownership, but also the benefit of owning the turbines that spin too.
Thank you for his intervention. I resist the invitation to back a land grab, perhaps, but he makes a very valid point. And we have a chance now to bake in greater benefits for our communities. These should not be seen as bribes to buy off opposition, but rather as the power giants entering partnership with communities. I still say our communities need far greater say over wind farm consents, but the urban-obsessed SNP in Edinburgh and Labour here in this place will not shift. But on wind power, there is an undeniable whirlwind of change. we have the chance to reap a positive harvest from that whirlwind for the people living in the shadow of giant turbines and pylons. Let's seize that chance.
I'm going to keep the time limit at 2.5. If everyone is kind to each other, I think we all still get in. And a brilliant example will be Polly Billington.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under you. I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I was moved to because of some of the comments that have already been made. And I do indeed think it is worthwhile, even in the short amount of time that I have, to remind people that our economy and the success of Britain over decades and indeed centuries has been because of our securing the success of an industrial revolution based on fossil fuels. I welcome the opportunity that we have here to establish a political consensus that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, where the poorest are the ones who end up with bearing the brunt of any kind of transformation, and we end up with the wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. So indeed, I share the sentiments of the gentleman who brought forward this debate, that we do need to be able to see an increased amount of community ownership in our renewables for very good reasons. I think what is interesting is he says that the major problem about this is the access to funding. I would say that it will only be an access to funding unless we change the rules. And I would like to see us establishing a political consensus again on the transformation of the energy market reform so that we can harness what is an endless amount of renewable energy in our communities across the country. And his suggestion of a green tariff, I have to say, would need to be in the context of that energy market reform, because there are indeed, as has been pointed out by other people today, significant standing charges on people's energy bills which militate against the kind of transformation that we need in our energy sector. I would also like to point out that when we have that community benefit, we need to be thinking very carefully about what powers we give and the governance that is structured around it in order for communities to be able to choose how they spend that money. There is a clear argument to make sure that energy revenue, as it were, is spent, therefore, on energy challenges within these communities, quite often, as you say, off-grid, quite often some of the most fuel-poor in our country. Although I would like to make an observation as a representative of 3 small towns on a very windy coast, that there are poor people who live in towns and cities too, and we would not want to establish an energy market that did not recognise that and tackle those challenges as well. I would like to make a point, particularly when talking about some of these ways of dealing with or mitigating the impacts on our communities, is that inevitably, and I will end now, inevitably we need...
Order. I think that means, because we're finishing at 28, so there's still loads of people. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. I'm pleased to serve with you in the chair, and I commend my honourable friend for acquiring the time for this debate. Clearly, I think once the Backbench Business Committee is up and running, this is a subject that would deserve longer and more careful scrutiny. Dr. Huck, I think, speaking from the perspective of Orkney and Shetland, I will keep things simple. Time is short, and indeed, simple is what I do best. The 2 things that I want people to understand about Orkney and Shetland is, first of all, we have the highest level of fuel poverty of any community in the country. So I hear what the Honourable Member from East Thanet says about poor people in all communities, and that's correct. But the truth of the matter is, the further away you get, the further north you go, the more you are likely to find people who are enduring poor housing standards with long, dark, cold winters, and that has an impact, and it is felt most acutely in Orkney and Shetland. The second thing I want people to understand is that when they talk about needing to find a way of making this work and a template and all the rest of it, in fact, you come to Orkney and Shetland because we've already done it. We have done it since the mid-1970s in relation to our relationship with the oil and gas industry, which we have hosted. We have the 2 largest onshore terminals for oil and gas in Western Europe, now coming perhaps into the autumn, if not quite the end of their existence. And the reason that you will find tremendous support for the oil and gas industry in Orkney and Shetland is that for the last few decades, it has been a tremendous source of community benefit for us. So if you have the presence of an energy generation source, or whatever it's going to be, in your community, if the community sees the benefit of that, and it might be in a direct financial sense of money going into a trust, or it might just be the availability and reliability of good quality, high-skilled, well-paid jobs, then the people will be much more accepting. When, as is the case at the moment, you see Scottish and Southern Energy Networks turning on Viking Energy wind farm in Shetland and being paid £2 million in August alone, not actually to generate any electricity, then that is where you see that disconnect. Dr. HoC, there's a great deal more that I could say about the subject. I hope that we will return to it. But just remember, whatever the question is, the answer is get yourself to Orkney and Shetland.
Kirsten Sullivan.
Thank you, Dr. HoC, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank the honourable gentleman for bringing forward this really important debate. Communities have suffered the impact of more than a decade of botched energy policies with soaring bills, whilst our reliance on imported energy has put our energy security at risk. And many of my constituents, our constituents, will pay their monthly energy bills to a company based 600 miles in an ocean away. We know that our energy system is broken, but for too long it has felt far too distant to fix. But this Labour government is already doing things differently with GB Energy, owned by the British people, which will invest in clean energy and ensure that our communities will reap the benefits. And at its heart is a commitment to support and expand community-owned energy projects owned by the local people that use them. But it's not new. Local people already benefit from community-owned projects which exist and thrive across the country. And the honourable gentleman spoke earlier about wind turbines. I know of many initiatives in my own constituency of Bathgate and Linlithgow which contribute to projects in local communities, delivering benefits for local communities, and with community ownership we can deliver even more. And let's be clear, community ownership is a Labour Party value, and it's not just as a concept, it's about delivering the benefits and the value in our cities, our towns and villages. The local power plan is the product of years of campaigning by the Cooperative Party, and as a Labour and Co-op MP, I'm proud that it's a Labour government that is going to deliver on this. At its most fundamental level, community power is about giving people a say and a stake in the things that impact their daily lives, like the honourable gentleman mentioned, about local jobs, about having lower prices, and about helping to support local projects that deliver according to local priorities.
Amy Stone.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to serve under your chair, Dr. HoC. And I congratulate my neighbour, the Honourable Member for Inverness, Skye and Westeros, in securing this debate, the first of, I'm sure, what will prove to be many debates in the years to come. He has talked about Norway and what Norway did. And yes, he's absolutely correct when he says that my constituents in Caithness and East Ross, when they look out the window and it's cold and they see the turbines going round and the money heading south, that is not a good thing at all. Now, the coldest community in the whole of the British Isles is the village of Altnahara in central Sutherland. And on the 30th of December 1995, it hit an astonishing minus 27.2 degrees centigrade. If that isn't cold, I don't know what is. So, the Honourable Member has talked about taking people with us, and that is incredibly sensible advice. They are paying a 50% premium, as he has pointed out, above other buyers of electricity. If we can take people with us along the Orkney model and the Shetland model, it will work and it can be done. But the key to this is how do you go about it? The Honourable Member has also mentioned, quite rightly, affordable housing and how such a fund could be used to address this issue. Quite recently I was in the village of Achadibui in Wester Ross, and speaking to young people with summer jobs there, I said, what will you do come the winter when the hotel closes? We have to head south, was the answer. Why? Because there's no housing in a place like Achadibui. Absolutely no affordable housing whatsoever. And that is a dagger at the heart of the viability of communities in the Highlands, believe you me, because that then leads to school rolls falling and all the rest of it. Now, the Honourable Member is quite correct to place this before us, and I hope he will be encouraged to, and I'm sure I don't need any encouragement at all, but to take this issue forward again, because it could have been tackled some years ago, but never was, by a perceived inertia by government at all levels to actually do something about this issue. There is a great opportunity, and I have every confidence, knowing the Minister, and I congratulate him on his appointment, and knowing the Honourable Member, my neighbour next door, that this will be the start of a discussion which I have every confidence, if we are positive about it, can achieve a fruitful outcome. Thank you.
Morello. Oh, he's not here. Edward Morello. No. Okay, he's on our list. Okay, so the list. Callum Miller in that case.
Thank you very much, Dr. HoC. It is an honour to serve with you in the chair, and I'd like to commend my honourable friend for securing this debate. In my constituency of Bicester and Woodstock, we have had multiple applications for solar farms. These are dwarfed by the enormous proposal by the Blenheim Estate and its development partners for an 840 megawatt solar plant, the so-called Botley West proposal. We do need to make a transition to more renewables in our energy mix. Liberal Democrats support this transition, and we want to see 90% of our energy from renewables by 2030. But this high ambition makes steps to increase community benefits from any new scheme essential. We must bring people with us on this journey by sharing the benefits. As with other aspects of renewable energy policy, the current framework is incomplete and hands too much control to the landowners and developers, often at the cost of local communities. We urgently need an approach to renewables that has a strong presumption in favour of meaningful community engagement and sustained community benefit. Botley West in my constituency has not met this standard, and this is one of the many reasons that I and many of my constituents object to the current proposal. Originally, the developers offered the community a benefit fund of £50,000. This would amount to £59.50 per megawatt of annual capacity. It's derisory. The £5,000 per megawatt of capacity recommended by the Community Benefits Protocol would instead deliver £4.2 million each year to the local community if the scheme goes ahead as currently proposed. So I urge the government to put in place a framework for new renewables that will place renewable schemes at the heart of community discussions and our communities at the heart of debates on renewable schemes.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to serve under your chairmanship. And can I also thank the member for Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire for calling this important debate today. I represent the constituency of Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, and along with my honourable friend, who represents Murray West, Nairn and Strathspey, I don't think anyone would contradict me in saying that these are the two constituencies most affected by all of these developments, and I think the Minister well understands that. And how are they affected? Well, the fisher folk are having to move among these pylons. The farmers are having to deal with the pylons and the undergrounding cabling. And these are areas of outstanding natural beauty. These are important points to take on board. But I want to speak primarily about the community benefit. Now, the things that guide this are engaging early, flexibility in the approach, transparency, and recognising the community needs. However, these things are not on a statutory basis, and that, I think, is part of the problem that we face. We need to put these matters on a statutory footing. Now, my honourable friend has mentioned in his maiden speech about the need for 5% of revenue of all newly consented renewable energy generated both offshore and onshore being paid to community benefit funds. I find it very difficult to disagree with him on that point. I want to get things into perspective a little bit as well. These are 2022 figures. In the UK, new wind farms, 500 million. In Scotland, 2.6 billion. Just gives you a sense of proportion. And we also know that in the Highland area at the moment, 301 turbines have been approved under the planning rules, but not yet built. And this far outstrips any other area of Scotland. And this is the constituency that I represent. But we also know, in the midst of all this fuel poverty, that Scotland's people, and particularly in my area, one of the coldest parts of the UK, we're paying the highest standing charges in the UK. So I believe that has to change. There are great benefits associated with community benefits, which are given by these companies. A very excellent example in my own constituency in Fraserburgh, the Murray East project made a substantial donation, and I look forward to similar developments in the near future. Thank you.
Reduced time limit of 2 minutes. Ollie Glover.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I commend my honourable friend, the member for Inverness, Skye and West Russia, for securing this important debate. And I think at the start of my remarks, it's important that we do remember the context and seriousness of the climate change challenge. But as other honourable members have said, we do need to bring people and communities with us, particularly where there are changes to their local landscape and area. This is particularly the case where land is given over to solar generation before opportunities to use building roofs have been fully exploited and explored. Renewable energy is essential to decarbonisation of our electricity grid, and my honourable friend's proposal of a 5% levy on gross revenue for community benefit would go a long way towards ensuring communities, as well as businesses and investors, enjoy the advantages of that investment in renewables. There are so many ways in which revenue from such schemes could benefit my constituents, not least to help plug the gap caused by our planning system between the housing that has gone into the area and the supporting infrastructure. Such benefits would include more, or indeed sometimes any, youth service provision in the largest communities of Grove, Wantage, Didcot and Wallingford. Local road, walking and cycling improvements, a contribution to the proposed new railway station serving Grove and Wantage, realisation of more opportunities for local healthcare improvements and home insulation projects, as other members have said. In conclusion, when considering how best to combat climate change, those policies which most resonate with people are those that benefit planet, people and economy. And local electricity generation is one of the best examples, and the proposed levy ensures that people, as well as planet and economy, will benefit.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I commend the honourable gentleman for securing this debate. The Whittam constituency, as the honourable minister will be well aware, is at the forefront of the National Grid's proposal when it comes to the Norwich and Tilbury upgrade on the National Grid. And really, I'd like to put to the minister just a number of concerns that have been raised by my constituents and across that part of Mid-Essex. Naturally, this is about community benefit, this debate, but of course, with the pylon development scheme, there's very little in terms of dialogue around community benefit whatsoever. And we know that guidance on the community benefits with regards to this scheme are still under development, and therefore there are no cost estimates or any details in terms of what this actually means for my constituents or even those affected by this entire proposal. I would really welcome in the summing up if the minister could say more about this. And alongside that, of course, reports are now indicating that there are possibly cheaper options to pylons, which is tunnelling. And in fact, other countries such as Germany have been at the forefront of this, along with innovation and technology. And I would welcome some more information from the minister and the department as to whether this is something that we factored into the community discussion around wider benefits, the upgrade to the grid, but also the work that he will be undertaking, because clearly it now looks, I don't think this is deliverable by 2030, but clearly we need to make some progress on all of this. Alongside this, the community benefit discussion is clearly live within government. So can I ask the Minister, within Essex and the east of England, when will he be able to perhaps meet with us to have some of these dialogues, discussions, so we can actually go back to our constituents and give them some assurance about what this is going to mean for our constituents?
Jim Shannon.
Chair, first of all, can I congratulate the honourable member for Inverness for setting the scene so very well, for highlighting the importance of a good relationship between renewable energy and the benefits for constituents. In 2 minutes it's impossible to say all I need to say, so I'll not think about. As we advance towards the COP conference, it's important to remember the benefits these things have for local communities which we represent. I always give a Northern Ireland perspective to these debates, Madam Chair, and community energy, and I have revealed that community benefit is often associated with large-scale energy, but there are many and numerous wind farms across Northern Ireland. Many developers now offer community funding to a level of 5,000 per megawatt per annum over their lifetime, and the energy strategy for Northern Ireland was published by the Department of Economy in December 21. For this action plan, government focused on potential energy schemes regarding the consideration of onshore wind, of solar and of hydrogen. There's a fantastic potential for shared ownership options across the United Kingdom, whereby a developer enters a financial partnership with a community group or local residents. These are things that we do in Northern Ireland and we wish to do more. At present, community benefit packages are provided on a voluntary basis, and there is no legal requirement in the UK for developers of energy infrastructure to provide community benefits. I want to highlight one issue to the Minister. While here legislation is a reserved matter, but for us in Northern Ireland, if we want to go ahead with the scheme, we need the plan department, which is a devolved matter. So it's a matter of marrying the two. So my question to the Minister would be, how can we work better, or how can the Minister work better with the plan department in Northern Ireland and the Minister to ensure that we have projects that we want to expedite, that we aren't held up. And with that, I look forward to the future to see how we can expand the possibility for better community renewable projects across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, especially to allow the devolved nations to play a part in that success. Thank you.
Linos Medi.
Ennismore, my constituency, is known as Energy Island and has a community-owned project in marine energy, Model Ice, which is an example to all. But now we have a large proposed development for solar covering 3,700 acres, around 2% of the island. The bigger of the two, Mineheer Energy, is 5 times the size of the UK's largest active solar. Actually, the local corner shop would offer more jobs than this development on the island, and actually would have a detrimental effect on the economy by affecting agriculture and tourism. So I asked the Minister, what assessment has he given to the impact of the loss of good quality agricultural land on our food security? The title of this debate includes the phrase community benefits. However, far too often it's large developers offering tokenistic gestures and small sums of money. The community benefit should be renamed community compensation. Compensation in the sense that large developers often give a small amount of money to communities who are then be burdened on the economic and social costs of the project. This is where I turn to the other development, Allowmorn and Ennismorn, where I've seen firsthand the developer changing the offer to the local community within a matter of days, offering one amount on a Thursday night and reduced amount on a Tuesday night. This behaviour is totally unacceptable in our communities. It is shocking that developers are only required to make voluntary commitments for compensation, which can seemingly be changed at a whim. However, to really address this issue, we must move beyond compensation to look at meaningful ownership. Community-owned and led renewable projects could provide lots of local benefits, such as cheaper energy bills, increasing resource efficiency, and helping to meet our carbon reduction targets without compromising Ennismore's landscape and economy. We need to step change in the way our energy system works, where we ensure that real community benefit is felt by those who host clean technologies. I hope the government listens to the calls for change and takes forward proposals which will bring meaningful benefits to local communities.
Ledbetter. Bitter.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And thank you to the mover of the motion for securing the debate today. Community benefit, fundamentally for me, the greatest community benefit for people across the north of Scotland in my constituency and neighbouring constituencies would be paying less for their energy. And also the investment in jobs that come with renewable energy across the north of Scotland. People are reliant on cars, off-grid, lower wages, and have inefficient housing. That is a fact right across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And the impact of high energy prices on them is really significant. It is a choice for many of whether they heat or eat. We hear it frequently, but it is a fact. Many of the communities in my constituency will this winter experience temperatures of negative double figures for many days, and that's quite normal. I've got communities like Aviemore, Newtonmore, right up in the Cairngorms, where there are literally thousands of people living with these temperatures every single year who understand what it's like to live in a cold and harsh winter and climate. I agree with many of the points that have been made by honourable members today. The member for Nahealan and Ayr mentioned community ownership. We have examples of that being progressed in my own constituency, and there's huge benefit from that. But I would make a particular ask a particular question of the Minister about transmission charges. Transmission charges have a huge impact on the investment pipeline of these projects, and if we don't get the investment in these projects, then we will miss out on significant community investment and significant community benefit. It cannot be right that people pay more for their energy when it's being bought hundreds of miles away at a cheaper price than they can buy it for. That's unacceptable. It's discriminatory, and it's been completely and the rug has been pulled out from under those communities with the removal of the winter fuel payment for so many people as well. Thank you.
First of our 3 front benches for the Lib Dems, Ros Savage.
Thank you, Dr. Huck. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank my honourable friend for bringing this debate to Westminster Hall and my colleagues for their fascinating contributions. I rise today to speak on an issue very dear to my heart, both as an environmental campaigner rowing alone across 3 oceans to raise awareness of the ecological crisis, and now as member for the South Cotswolds, about to present the Climate and Nature Bill as my private member's bill in the House tomorrow. There is both promise and peril in renewable energy. The Liberal Democrats wholeheartedly welcome the steps being taken to revitalise British investment in renewables, starting to rectify the missed opportunities of the previous Conservative government, who never seemed to quite grasp the scale, scope and speed required to avoid environmental disaster. These new initiatives hold the promise of lower energy bills, high-quality jobs, greater energy security, and the chance of actually meeting our net zero targets. However, we must proceed with caution and with wisdom. The proposal for an excessively large solar farm in my constituency of the South Cotswolds serves as a stark reminder of how renewable energy projects, when poorly conceived, can backfire. This solar development, the wrong size, in the wrong place and in the wrong ownership, foreign ownership, has provoked a visceral negative response from local communities. We risk alienating the very public whose support we need by allowing unsympathetic developments to mar our beautiful countryside. Dr. Huck, we need only look at the cautionary tale of our water companies to understand the perils of allowing foreign profit-driven entities to monopolise our essential utilities. The owners of companies like Thames Water have prioritised profits over the needs of customers and the health of our natural environment. The result has been higher bills for customers, lack of investment in infrastructure, and toxic pollution killing our precious waterways. We cannot afford to repeat these mistakes in our renewable energy sector. The transition to clean energy must prioritise the needs of our communities and the protection of our environment over the profits of distant shareholders. Communities have to be involved, and it is clear there is a significant gap in the GB Energy Bill around community energy. We, as Liberal Democrats, firmly believe that communities living near large-scale energy infrastructure should receive tangible benefits. We're ready and willing to work collaboratively with the Minister and his government to ensure that these benefits are guaranteed in the bill. Our vision includes large energy suppliers working with community schemes to sell locally generated power to local customers at discounted rates, guaranteeing that community benefit funds receive a fair share of the wealth generated by local renewables infrastructure, empowering local authorities to develop renewable electricity generation and storage strategies, and giving small low-carbon generators the right to export their electricity to existing suppliers on fair terms. Dr. Huck, the success of our clean energy economy, our ability to tackle the cost of living crisis, and the realisation of our climate targets all hinge on community buy-in. We need to win hearts and minds, persuading people that net zero projects are good for their communities, their pockets, and our future national economy and security. To this end, we urge the government to enact the necessary regulatory changes to truly support community energy. Community benefits for energy schemes should be guaranteed, and community energy schemes should receive discounted rates for the clean electricity they contribute. And if I may just end on a personal note, as someone who has witnessed firsthand the beauty and fragility of our natural world during my ocean rowing expeditions, I'm deeply committed to ensuring that our transition to renewable energy doesn't, in the process, destroy the beauty of the natural countryside we're working so hard to preserve for future generations. We need to get the balance right, and people have to be part of that equation. Thank you.
Mark Garnier.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hook, and it's a great pleasure as ever to serve under your chairmanship. And can I congratulate the honourable member for Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire for his really important debate that he's brought about today. And this is something he raised in his maiden speech, so clearly something he's passionate about. And can I also say, actually, what a great pleasure it is for somebody who's been here for 14 years to hear so many newly elected MPs bringing fresh perspective to this House. Parliament is a better place for new MPs coming in and sharing their experiences. And I'm afraid 2 minutes is not enough for some of these speeches. But in his maiden speech, the honourable member made valid concerns about the industrialisation of the countryside. This is an issue that we, all of us here, and certainly we on the Conservative benches, have consistently guarded against. Our belief is that the need for renewable energy must be balanced with the preservation of rural landscapes, ensuring that development is sustainable and respectful of local communities. And aside from the honourable member for Inverness, Skye and West Ross-shire's desire to see money flow back into communities, it's the only way we will get the public to support any plans for net zero and a decarbonised energy grid, as we heard from the Liberal Democrat spokesperson. Unfortunately, the new government has immediately begun to torment rural communities in a crusade for carbon neutrality by 2030. Just days after the election, the government removed key protections from the National Planning Policy Framework, and these provisions required developers to demonstrate that onshore wind projects had community support and that local planning impacts were properly addressed. And in the new Secretary of State's first week, he disregarded the previous Secretary of State's legal planning guidance, which stated that the best and most versatile agricultural land must be avoided for new solar farm applications, and that the cumulative impact of many solar farm applications must be considered together. These decisions by the new Labour government undermine the very communities that bear the burden of hosting new energy infrastructure whilst ensuring minimal benefit. And even more concerning, we understand that the government intends to consult on bringing large onshore wind proposals into the nationally significant infrastructure project regime, which would further centralise decision-making, diminishing local input. And it's absolutely vital that the government listens to the views and concerns of local communities about onshore wind. Residents should have a say in projects that directly affect their environment, not be sidelined by top-down diktats from Westminster. And we must ensure that local voices are heard and that community consent remains central to the planning process for renewable energy products. And I also want to note the previous government's approach to community benefit and how we were committed to ensuring that communities hosting vital energy projects were directly rewarded. We announced plans that people living near transmission infrastructure could receive up to £1,000 a year in electricity bill discounts, not sure this is a year actually, providing meaningful financial relief to local households. In addition to these savings, we announced that funds would be available for local projects, empowering communities to invest in initiatives that matter most to them, whether it's improving local parks, enhancing energy efficiency, or supporting education programmes for young people. We had intended to publish guidance this year on making this a reality, so this debate is timely for an update from the Minister on all of these plans. But when it comes to the impact of new grid infrastructure, pylons across much of our countryside will be what concerns our residents the most. Labour's accelerated push for pylons across rural landscapes threatens to blight our countryside. This rush to meet unrealistic targets will impose unnecessary visual and environmental costs on rural Britain, with little regard for the long-term impact on our natural beauty. But it's the National Energy Systems Operator, formerly known as the National Grid, which has recently published a report which says that whilst grid enlargement by 2030 means pylons, grid enlargement by 2034 allows enough time to be able to underground these connections and at the same time deliver a £600 million savings in the delivery of the grid. So my honourable friend for East Surrey, the Shadow Secretary of State, highlighted during the election campaign that our party remains committed to protecting our landscapes. We propose learning from Germany, where underground power lines have become the default presumption in designated areas like national parks. This approach not only preserves the character of these unique places, but also respects the wishes of local communities, and crucially could save bill payers money in the long term. Over the last decade, technological advances have made it increasingly feasible to bury power lines, especially in sensitive areas. And unlike the new government, we would have undertaken a rapid review to assess the advantages of alternative network technologies compared to overhead pylons. By exploring options such as underground cables and other innovative technologies, we can achieve energy grid decarbonisation without the impact of our countryside that Labour apparently is prepared to accept. It is vital that we approach the energy transition with a clear vision that balances the energy transition with the need to protect our countryside and safeguard community interests. And Labour's plans apparently seem to be short-sighted and fail to strike that balance. But whilst we have real concerns regarding the government's plans for the countryside, I did want to briefly mention that I'm extremely supportive of technology that could have real community benefit. Ones that are innovative, easy to deliver and produce cheaper, clean energy. I recently met with experts from the University of Oxford and Oxford PV to discuss breakthroughs in solar power generation. These are guys who are working incredibly hard to produce lightweight solar panels that mean that you can use the roof of factories or warehouses without having to reinforce the building underneath. I'll give way.
Is he aware that the National Farming Union in Scotland accept the arguments in the case for pylons as opposed to underground cabling?
Well, I think it's great if they accept it, then that's absolutely fine. But it's but at the end of the day, there are an awful lot of people who don't accept it, and we can look at the alternatives where they could potentially be cheaper. I'm slightly mindful of time. I'll take one more intervention.
Does it not strike him as strange that SSE proposed to underground the cable in the Highlands from Dundonald to Bewley, and yet say it's impossible in other parts? And this is a very mountainous part of the Highlands. I think there's something what my neighbour said about it being possible.
Sorry, I might have misunderstood your neighbour. Yeah, look, it's an engineering challenge, but at the end of the day, I think we need to listen to the experts who actually know kind of what they're talking about. I'm not entirely certain I understand the point they're both trying to make, but if we can underground, it would be a better thing for communities. Certainly if it's cheaper, certainly if it's better for the environment, and if it means taking a little bit of extra time to do it, then we need to get together to think carefully about that. But getting back to my Oxford PV and Oxford University, using these kinds of technology together with community-based power generation has the potential to reduce strain on the national grid and limit the need for large-scale projects that can disrupt our landscape and our communities. Through the Energy Act 2023, the previous government committed to removing barriers to community energy projects by launching a call for evidence. And I'd certainly be interested if, from the Minister, if the new Labour government will honour this commitment, and perhaps the Minister will share with us in his remarks later. The challenges we face in transmitting renewable energy, particularly wind power from areas of generation to areas of demand, underscore the urgent need for grid upgrades. The current limitations in grid capacity, most notably the B6 boundary between Scotland and England, have become a major constraint in our energy system. This boundary is the largest single network bottleneck, preventing vast amounts of wind power generated in Scotland from reaching high demand areas in England. And as a result, we are facing enormous constraint payments, where wind turbines are shut down despite being able to generate clean, affordable energy. This must be the greatest frustration for people living in those areas of natural beauty, such as the Highlands and the Shetland Islands. Not only have they had their landscape blighted, but if the equipment isn't working at full capacity, bill payers will be paying for constraint payments in order for them not to generate electricity. Orkney, for instance, has some of the most powerful wind turbines in the UK, yet these often have to be turned off simply because the grid cannot handle the energy they produce. And this is a glaring example of how our infrastructure is failing to keep up with the energy transition. The Highlands Islands are energy-rich regions, but their potential is being stifled by inadequate transmission networks. And this moves on to the biggest concern for many residents: how the government will deliver the infrastructure required for a decarbonised energy grid by 2030. And I must say to new Labour MPs, at the next general election, in just 4 or 5 years' time, all of our constituents, and Labour MPs' constituents in particular, will be asking the question, did you meet your 2030 target? They will be asking, what did you do to my energy bills and what did you do to the countryside? Labour members claim that their plans will save households £300 a year on energy bills, but it seems incredulous that this will ever be achieved. In this House, I asked when we might receive a full system cost analysis. In the House, I asked when we might receive a full systems cost analysis of Labour's net zero plans by 2030. And we still haven't got an answer. The answer was in due course. We do need an answer when we, how much this is going to cost. So despite the government's pledge that they will cut everyone's energy bills by £300, a promise which remains on their website, but curiously no ministers can bring themselves to repeat it, although I have no doubt the minister will be delighted to repeat it. If he gets a chance, I will write up in a minute. He'll have a lot of chances. The actual price of the proposal is going to be a huge strain on taxpayers. So this leads me to a number of questions for the government, which I would, if I may, put to the minister. What are the detailed full systems costs associated with achieving net zero power grid by 2030? Will the government confirm it still plans to save households £300 a year off their energy bills, and from what baseline? Is it from the election? When is it? How does the government plan to balance the urgent need for rapid decarbonisation with the development of emerging energy technologies, either by supporting some of the innovative technologies I've mentioned or ones with longer lead times such as nuclear? Will the government explore alternatives to large-scale pylon construction to protect communities and landscapes, such as undergrounding and undersea cable alternatives? And will the government commit, at the very least, to matching the community benefit regime set out by the last Conservative government of up to £10,000 off people's energy bills over 10 years for families in areas which have new energy infrastructure. In conclusion, how we achieve this transition matters to all of our constituents. It matters to our natural world, it matters to our energy security, and it matters to everybody's energy bills. It is essential that this transition delivers real benefits to the communities most affected by renewable energy projects. We need to ensure that these communities are not just sites for energy generation, but true beneficiaries, most importantly through lower energy bills. The government's rushed approach risks sacrificing long-term gains for short-term targets, leaving rural communities to bear the brunt of these costs without the promised savings. We on this side believe in a balanced approach, one that harnesses the latest technologies, listens to local communities, strengthens grid capacity without degrading our natural landscapes. We should be supporting innovative solutions and new technology, as well as focusing on lower energy bills, as well as securing decarbonised energy grids. And I look forward to hearing from the Minister, who campaigned like a stalwart in opposition, but now finds himself on the front bench in government, having got himself elected. I very much look forward to him and congratulate him on his post, by the way.
Time in the same day for both of us. Minister Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Dr. HoC. It is a pleasure to be under your chairmanship again today. And it is good to look out and see so many of my colleagues from the Great British Energy Bill here again discussing energy. I'm glad we got the bill through committee quickly enough that we could be here and didn't need our afternoon session in the Bill Committee. I don't have a huge amount of time, and I do want to try and get to as many honourable members' contributions as I can and leave, of course, the honourable gentleman time to conclude his own Westminster Hall debate. But I do want to start by thanking and congratulating the honourable gentleman for securing this important debate, and hopefully you'll see from the amount of enthusiasm and participation in this debate how important others find this subject as well. And I know from his maiden speech and from other contributions how important this is to him and to his constituents. Just a few weeks ago, I had a real pleasure of visiting his constituency when I went to the Isle of Egg to spend a day learning about the community energy project there. And it is, although in some ways a unique example of community benefits, it's also a very good example of how a whole community can benefit from these projects. The community genuinely having the power in their own hands with their own micro-generation grid, but also you can see the benefits in terms of people upskilling themselves to understand how the grid works and to manage it on a day-to-day basis. Can I also thank all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions today, and I will try to respond to as many of them as I can. Just briefly, though, I do want to start on some of the context for today. This government comes in facing three interlinked challenges. How do we ensure energy security? How do we ensure climate leadership, and how do we make sure we are bringing down bills for people across the country? And our response to that is our clean power mission by 2030. We know that clean power is the only way to protect our constituents from the roller coaster of price spikes that we have faced over the past few years, and also to deliver the climate leadership that we need. That's why we are introducing Great British Energy, why we introduced the bill within the first 100 days, why it is progressing through Parliament as quickly as we can, with its headquarters in Aberdeen. We know that it is an important part of the plan we have to increase the speed of delivery of renewable projects, but also, crucially, and I'll come back to this point, to make sure that the British people have a stake in this energy future. And the party opposite, of course, has for many, many years accepted the premise of publicly owned energy companies, but just doesn't support the premise of the British people being part of a publicly owned energy company, just companies beyond our shores. And of course, we welcome their investment in this country, but Great British Energy is about us saying we'd quite like the British public to have a part to play in that as well. A number of honourable members made the point around community ownership, and although this debate's about community benefits, I do think there are, as a number of people have said, there are links between them. The Great British Energy Bill is about setting up the company, but there is a wider context in what the government's committed to around our local power plan, which commits to much more community ownership of energy and ensuring that communities, large and small, have the funding, but also the capacity, which I think is crucial, to take forward some of these projects themselves. So delivering on our clean energy mission, which is undoubtedly ambitious, will require action on a number of fronts. And I do want to just touch on this point about infrastructure, which many honourable members have said. There is, I think, at the heart of the current Conservative Party's rhetoric on this, a fundamental contradiction. We heard it from the Shadow Minister, but I also heard almost exactly the same words from another one of his colleagues on the Shadow front bench earlier today, where on one hand there is a recognition that we need to have significant upgrades to the grid, and yet on the other hand it doesn't want any commitment to building any new infrastructure to deliver it. Both of these things cannot be true at the same time. And I gently point out to members opposite that after 14 years of government, this is not a new problem. The grid did not suddenly fall apart in July of this year with a Labour government. And this challenge has been facing the country for a long time. Indeed, I would meet them halfway and say even beyond the 14 years they were in government, there's been a challenge on the grid. But we had 14 years to take action on this and did not. This government is now moving forward. And so if we want to see the connections issue resolved, if we want to see what a number of honourable members have raised around community projects being able to connect into the grid, we do need to build some of that infrastructure. And that does require communities to host the infrastructure. And so I want to turn to a number of the points that have been made around how we work in partnership with communities, not in coercion, but collaboration, not coercion. It's important this entire mission is a national mission for government, but also for all of the public being part of us achieving clean power by 2030. Key to this will be reforms to planning regulations to deliver critical infrastructure that this country needs. Nationally significant infrastructure does need to be built, and our planning system at the moment is holding much of this back. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which we will introduce shortly, will speed up and streamline the planning process, and we'll also be updating relevant national policy statements within the next year to provide certainty to industry. And particularly in Scotland, the current electricity infrastructure consenting regime is from the Electricity Act 1989 and hasn't been updated in line with other legislation across the UK. It's too slow and it is holding back investment. I'm working very closely with my Scottish Government counterparts to look at how we develop a set of proposals to reform this and speed up the new infrastructure development that we need. But I come back to the point that a number of honourable members have rightly made, that it is important that as much as we need to streamline the planning process, because we need to build this infrastructure, communities must be at the heart of it. Public engagement and consultation will continue to be incredibly important. but so also will more of a holistic approach to planning energy infrastructure in the first place, which I know has been the root cause of many of the challenges that honourable members have raised today. The lack of strategic planning in some of our energy infrastructure in the past has led to some of these real bottlenecks that we want to avoid in the future. Finally, on this point, if I can turn to the point around communities who live near clean energy infrastructure, and I would include in that the transmission infrastructure that we need to build. Communities, by hosting this infrastructure, and let's be really clear about this, they are providing a service to this country. It is essential that we build this infrastructure, but it has to be built somewhere. And the challenge I have with some of the discussion in this is that we do fall into the trap sometimes of saying, yes, we agree we need to upgrade the grid, but please not anywhere near my constituency. Well, that isn't going to work, unfortunately. What we want to ensure we do is for those communities who do host this infrastructure, on behalf of all of us as a country, that they directly benefit from it. Communities, as I say, are important not just in terms of hosting the infrastructure, but in terms of the wider acceptance of this direction of travel that we are on. And we need communities to be with us if we're going to achieve the pace that we need to. So at the moment, as has been raised, these community benefits are voluntary arrangements. They could be monetary or non-monetary schemes. There are a variety of different options across the country, some that actually work extremely well, and others that, as many of you here know, do not work so well. The voluntary nature of how community benefits are delivered does lead to these significant variations. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
In my submission to this debate, I outlined the issue. The issue here, the infrastructure is a reserve matter, but back home in Northern Ireland, it's a planning matter which is devolved. It's how the two combine together. It's a very simple question. It might be a much more difficult answer, but I would really appreciate if the Minister could answer, please. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I was going to come to the Honourable Gentleman's specific point in a moment, but he's absolutely right. And the work that I've been doing since I came into post with my counterpart ministers in the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish governments has been around how we can work together. Clearly in Northern Ireland that is slightly different because energy is transferred, and so the policy levers are slightly different, but we have the same outcomes in mind across the whole of the UK, which is really important, and I'll continue to work with Conor Murphy and the wider executive to bring us together as much as possible, because I think he makes a very important point. Just on the point around community benefits in particular, we are currently in the middle of reviewing, and this is work that was started by the previous government, but we are continuing at pace, reviewing how we can effectively deliver community benefits for communities living near this infrastructure, looking at examples across Europe. We're not on this journey on our own. There are other countries that have been doing this for a very long time, learning from that, and developing clear guidance on community benefits for both the infrastructure and the transmission network as well. And we'll publish this in due course. Great British Energy's role here will be to build upon existing community energy schemes, some underway in across England and in Scotland and Wales and in Northern Ireland, building on that experience already to contribute more where it can. Turning to just a few of the specific points that were raised by honourable members. On the points of solar projects which were raised by the Honourable Lady for Glastonbury and Somerton, who's not in her place, but I'll write to her on this point. I think it is an incredibly important point, and part of what the Solar Task Force, which was set up by the previous government, reconvened by this government, is to try and set out a very clear pathway for solar projects. There are a number of other points on standing charges, which a number of honourable members made. The government is looking at that issue right now. We do accept the point that far too much of a burden and bills lands on standing charges, and we're working with the regulator to do much more about that. And I'm conscious, although I have 12 other points from honourable members, I had 8 minutes in which to do it. And so I would just simply close on this so the honourable member has time to wind up the debate, that this is an issue we take very seriously as a government. Our ambition is to bring communities with us on this journey. We want to do that in a collaborative approach with all honourable members, but with communities themselves at the heart of this. And we'll have much more to say on this in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you.
Angus MacDonald.
I did forget to disclose that I may have a potential conflict of interest. The details are on the parliamentary website, so I apologise for not saying before, but I don't think anybody would find it a very major one. I'm going to put down my bit of paper. You did mention community benefits. Sorry, Doctor. The Minister did mention community benefits, but in rather a weak way. The people in this room, the MPs in this room, do represent the majority of the landmass of Britain. They absolutely do. I think there's 60 plus of us here, and they represent the majority of it. And I think the message loud and clear to you is that we all feel very strongly about the community benefits, and we very much hope it will be significant. Anyway, thank you very much for allowing me to host this debate.
So this House has considered community benefits from renewable energy projects. As many of those who have that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Order. Order.